Our guest on the Horseman's Corner today is Amy Skinner. She's a North Carolina horsewoman, and give me some of your background, will you, Amy?
Well, sure, Howard. I've been riding since I was 6. I caught the bug. I don't know why. Family does not ride. And my parents took me to a military riding school, and we lived in Venezuela because my dad was in the Air Force. And I've been riding ever since then.
Who are some of the people that you've ridden with, and what are some of the disciplines that you've taken part in?
Well, I primarily ride dressage now, but I teach people and work with horses of all disciplines. I started about 6 years ago riding with Buck Brannaman, and that was the first introduction to anything like this that I'd ever seen. And since then, I've ridden with Buster McGlory. I've ridden with Leslie Desmond. I've ridden with Brent Graff is the one I have most recently been riding with, as well as several dressage instructors. I flew to Spain and spent 6 weeks at the Royal Andalusian School there. And I guess, whoever comes along who has something to offer, I try to ride with.
What do you pick up when you go to an event like the Best Horse Practices Summit? You're one of the presenters there, but is it an opportunity for you to learn as well?
Oh, absolutely. The Best Horse Practices Summit is the best event I think I've ever been to. It's got everything from horse care to riding and everything in between. Anyone who's willing to open their mind a little bit could learn a ton. Whenever I go, I pick up so much information. I go home with just a notebook full, and I can't wait to implement some new ideas.
You had an interesting blog in the Knicker News, which is really an interesting website, and it had to do with fear in horses. Talk about that a little bit, will you, and why that's an important area for you to discuss.
Well, riding fear is something that I think is a really common problem, so I think it's important to discuss. As almost every time I teach or travel to a clinic, I would say a good percentage of folks are at least a little afraid. And so I feel like my job as a teacher is to help people understand what the horse is saying and what it means when it does certain behaviors or certain expressions, and for the rider how to learn to interpret these things and feel like they have some understanding of what's going on, as well as to teach them how to ride in better balance so they don't feel so worried. But I think worry really comes from not understanding.
Fear is not a bad thing, is it?
No, not always. Definitely there are some people who are riding horses who are afraid, and they have every right to be. That's a lot of times a mismatched pair, or they are in over their head with a situation that's fairly dangerous. There are definitely times to be afraid, and fear is a natural way for your brain and body to say this is not a good situation to be in. So, yeah, fear is not something to just out and out throw out.
Why, though, is it important that you overcome some of those fears? Why is it important to the horse?
Well, it's important for a horse if you are interested in guiding that horse and navigating a relationship with that horse to not be afraid as much as possible, because in those situations, the horse is going to need some guidance and some leadership. And so I tell my students all the time, if I came in here and was scared to death about teaching you guys and said, I don't know if you guys are going to make it or not, you wouldn't feel any confidence from me and you wouldn't be able to learn or grow. So if we're working with a horse and we're afraid, we're not setting the horse up to succeed or change in a better way.
What are some of the things that you can do to overcome fears that you might have when you're working with the horse?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's really important to have the right horse for you. And I frequently see riders with little confidence and lack of experience matched up with horses that also have little confidence and little experience, and that's just not a good confidence builder for either one. But I would advise people to first get some good riding lessons and learn to get really comfortable riding at the walk, trot, and canter, and feel like they have a good feel for a horse's movement and how to go with it and then guide it. And then I would say find a good instructor or some books or some good information out there to guide you through equine behavior and learn to identify different behaviors and how to head those off or redirect them to something more constructive.
In the blog that you wrote about a horse that was It looked like it had some real issues, would bite, strike, and kick, but you didn't seem to be afraid of it. How did that turn out?
Well, I still work with that horse, and he's doing really well. He looks pretty impressive in the photos because he's about 18 hands tall, so he could get some pretty good air when he was upset. But I wasn't afraid because I felt pretty confident that I understood where his behaviors came from, and I felt pretty confident in knowing that I could redirect them without getting him or myself into trouble, and that in a matter of time he would come around, and that's exactly what happened.
Did it take a considerable amount of time before he came around, or was it relatively quick?
I noticed changes within a month, but to be able to consistently pull him out and have good sessions was about 6 months.
Times working with these horses is not a short-term deal, is it?
No, especially when the brain of a horse has been rewired toward aggression. I think aggression is not a natural response to go to instantly. Horses are more flight-natured. This horse had been cornered so often, and he was so big that once he got cornered and felt too much pressure, he learned to lash out. And so in this case, with the help of Steve Peters, we had to really work at sort of changing the wiring of his brain away from aggression towards something healthier.
Yeah, that is a long-term process a lot of times because these, and usually that you said he was cornered, felt that he was cornered. That was a man-made situation then, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I have never met a horse show aggression without being involved with a person in some way that has put too much pressure on them. And that pressure ranges. I mean, every horse has a different range of pressure they can tolerate, but there's always some pressure involved for aggression to show.
Okay, give me some of your philosophy about working with the horses, will you, and how you go about working with that horse.
I guess you could say that my first interest is in helping a horse understand what's expected of him in a human's life. So say I have a young horse, I'd like to start by introducing him to all the things that he's going to encounter in his life in a way that he doesn't feel afraid, so in a way that he can feel like he participates in those activities and can find, balance and relaxation in those things. I'd say that relaxation is a huge part of my philosophy, that if a horse is afraid, that doesn't benefit him or us. But I also like to push their comfort zone so that they can be confident in experiencing the day-to-day things they might encounter. Those aren't natural to a horse's life. So there's a thin line between relaxation and engagement and confidence and sort of avoiding scary things. So that's where I try to walk the line in between those things.
Do we sometimes not give the horse enough time to process what we're telling them to do or what we want them to do? For example, let's say we want the horse to go under some noodles that are hanging. We got to give that horse enough time and enough curiosity where he can take a look at it, feel it, smell it, and then maybe go on through. Is that what needs to be done?
Absolutely. I frequently run into this issue when it comes to trailer loading, where a horse starts to look kind of interested in going in, and then the person gets excited and wants the whole rest of the horse to get in the trailer, and that's where we tend to shoot the gun a little bit, when the horse really might need some time to smell the trailer, look at the trailer, check the depth of the trailer, paw the trailer floor a little bit, and maybe really just needs to hang out there for a few minutes or even 10 minutes before he feels good about coming in. And most of the time I've found that if you give them the time they need to investigate and set up the right parameters, they'll go through on their own.
Yeah, it's interesting, and horses are very curious, aren't they?
Yeah, when we're not involved, they're really curious. One example is I had a whole bunch of stuff in a pasture that I had to put my horse in. There was a shed, and there were some kind of a weird obstacles hanging out in there. And a client of mine had tried to lead the horses around all of those scary things, and the horse became so afraid he kept trying to pull away. Later that night, we turned them loose, and every horse that I owned was in that stuff, pawing it, chewing it, looking at it. The difference was that when you try to make a horse do something, they feel trapped, and their self-preservation comes up, whereas when we leave them alone to have time to investigate, they almost always can become curious.
Amy, let's take a short break, hear from the folks that make this program possible, but you listeners stay with us, will you, because we're going to have a lot more from Amy Skinner in just a moment. You're listening to the Horseman's Corner. Bunkhouse Trailer Sales has a large inventory of Big Bend trailers that handle the tough jobs like they should, with features that every cattleman can appreciate, but they're doing it from a new location. That's at Steve's Truck and Equipment between Scottsbluff and Mitchell in the Nebraska Panhandle. If you can't stop by, give them a call at 308-623-9955 or check them out at bunkhousetrailersales.com. bunkhousetrailersales.com for your next stock or horse trailer, including the tough, practical, cattleman-friendly Big Bend trailers. If you happen to miss the Horseman's Corner on the radio, you can always pick it up by going to horsemanscorner.com. They're all archived in there. There are hundreds of interviews on horsemanscorner.com from some outstanding horse people, some of the best in the world, and you can hear them on horsemanscorner.com. So if you happen to miss an issue, if you happen to miss it on the radio, you can always pick it up at horsemanscorner.com. A great resource for horse people, horsemanscorner.com. Welcome back to the Horseman's Corner. I'm Howard Hale, host of the program. Let's continue this interesting conversation with Amy Skinner. You say that dressage is the discipline that you're really involved with right now. What drew you to dressage?
The more I learned that bringing physical balance to a horse could help bring them mental balance, the more I became interested in it. And my draw to dressage is just that. I really enjoy understanding the intricacies of balancing a horse, getting them stronger, getting them more supple, helping them develop into a confident athlete is really something I enjoy doing.
What age do you like to start your horses?
I might pull them out at 2 and put a saddle on them and get them comfortable with some things. At 3, I might put a ride on or 2, but I generally don't consistently ride young horses until they're 4.
What's the reason for waiting until they're 4, in your view?
Well, I think there's a lot of research out about their growth plates not being fully closed up for a while, and mentally they think they're just not prepared at 2 years old to be holding down steady jobs. I think that's just really too fast for a young horse to go from complete freedom to holding down a job.
Kind of like putting a 10-year-old kid in a full-time job. Then is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah, we take our kids and put them in preschool just to get them used to getting up and getting dressed and going out, and then they do kindergarten where they start learning a little, and then they go through 1st through 12th grade before they go to college. And we pull a 2-year-old out of the field and expect to be doing serious competition sometimes, which I think is just far too fast.
What you see people working in the round pen a lot with the flag. Is that flag something that can be overdone?
Oh, absolutely. I think the flag is a valuable tool, but it's something that frequently gets overdone.
How does it? In what way does it get overdone?
Well, I think the flag, as well as any desensitization tool, becomes a tool to sort of deaden the horse completely. When I work with a horse, I'm not really interested in deadening them, but in helping them get exposed to certain things and keeping their sensitivity intact. In other words, I'm not interested in creating a horse that does not react to stimulus. I'm interested in creating a horse that isn't afraid, but still has plenty of life left for me to direct.
Well, Jim Hicks put it in a way then that makes sense, and you probably would agree with, familiarize rather than desensitize.
Absolutely. I think I read his article in Effective Horseman, and I thought it was perfect.
Yeah, that's an interesting magazine, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty great.
What when you're going to be working here at the Best Horse Practices Summit, what area are you going to be working in? What are you going to be doing there?
Well, my colleague Catherine Silva and I will be talking a lot about a rider's seat and how it influences the horse. In my opinion, a lot of horsemanship clinics tend to focus more on what the horse should be doing and not enough on how the person influences the horse. So it's kind of been a crusade of mine over the last year at least, is the way in which you're sitting directly affects the balance of the horse, which affects them mentally as well. So Catherine and I would like to run through a quick course on the rider's positioning and how that affects each of the gaits, the horse's balance, whether they can be off beforehand or not, depending on the way you're sitting.
Is it important for the rider, and I don't care what age the rider is or the person working with the horse, you ought to be in decent physical condition yourself, should you not?
Absolutely. You don't have to be running triathlons, but you need to have at least enough fitness and stamina to climb up in the saddle without assistance and to be able to walk, trot, and canter without getting winded. I think lack of physical fitness is a huge problem in the horse world, and another thing that leads to lack of confidence and fear in the rider is they don't physically feel stable up on the horse's back.
Is weight one of the things that can, in other words, a person, you ought to keep your weight at a reasonable level, shouldn't you?
Absolutely. Weight is a huge factor, not only for the horse's benefit and health, but the rider's benefit and health, too. You're going to be more unstable the more weight you have.
When you work with students, and I assume that you have students that you work with regularly, is that something that you enjoy?
Working with students, I love working with students. Teaching is one of my favorite things.
What are some of the common problems that those students have when when you start working with them, Amy?
Well, it runs the gamut. Fear is a big one. Another really big problem that I encounter with a lot of students is they have run through somebody's school or system. In other words, they have methods that we use step by step, and they have a hard time feeling out each situation to see what needs to be done. They're used to, okay, I've done step one, and now I'm on to step two, and it isn't working, and I don't understand why. So when I teach, I try to help people understand that riding is a little bit more of an art form, and that every situation is going to call for a little of this, a little of that. I kind of liken it to cooking. I don't ever cook with a recipe or a timer. I just taste test as I go along. There's some basic concepts to follow. You know, you don't want to burn your soup or put too much salt in it, but you know the concepts, and then you play it by feel.
Are you trying to tell me that a cookie-cutter approach doesn't work with the horse?
Unfortunately not. One of the benefits to one of the things I feel fortunate about is in my short career, because I'm fairly young, is I've had so many different types of horses that have forced me out of any mold I might have had. You know, everything from that 18-hand 4-year-old that reared and bucked and all that stuff, to I've had off-the-track thoroughbreds, I've had Mustangs, I've had destroyed dressage horses, I've had a little bit of everything, and each and every one of them is completely unique. And there's just no pattern that I can see that can be applied to each one of them.
Well, and the people that you worked with, you talked about some of the folks, Buck Brannaman, Brent Graff. I don't remember some of the others, but there were some good people that you worked with. They don't have any pattern, do they?
They generally don't. No, they tend to go by feel. Again, there are some things you need to have. And then after that, it's a feel-by-feel situation. Every situation is going to require... There's no amount of leg I can tell you that needs to be done at this moment that will work perfectly, you know?
And that's is it sometimes a mistake for the student to become, groupie and just absolute? In other words, I guess I'm saying, does a student need to be pretty open-minded and explore a lot of avenues themselves?
Yeah, a lot of my students that I teach are like, well, we're buck people, or we're Pirelli people, or we're only dressage people, or we're this or that. And that sort of tends to set them up to be closed off to some ideas that might be helpful for their horse at that moment, that they say, well, this is how I do things. So that's also a struggle. I think it's really common for people to get that way, but it's a definite hurdle, in my opinion, for becoming a real horseman or woman. You need to be open-minded also.
It doesn't make much difference whether you're working with a dressage horse or a cutting horse. Principles are the same, aren't they?
In my opinion, yes. All horses need to be balanced and have confidence and exposed to things. And all of the dressage horses I work cows on, and we go out on the trail and we open gates, and I think it makes them better dressage horses. And I think all the cow horses that I've ever had in training did better with dressage training. So I think there's a nice foundation each of these horses can have that will only make them better at their job.
What would you like to add, or what would you like to talk about that I haven't been perceptive enough to ask you about, Amy?
I think you've been pretty thorough.
Well, let's get a commercial message in for you then. How do people get in touch with you?
Well, you can go to my Facebook, you can go to my website, which is amyskinnerhorsemanship.com. You can check me out on Facebook from there. You can look at my blog on knickernews.net. And you can check out my personal blog, which I think is askinner89.wordpress.com.
Do you get quite a bit of feedback from the blogs?
The Knicker News has been a really good avenue. I've really enjoyed writing for it. I think I've written it for about 5 years now. I've got maybe 70 articles in. I've gotten a lot of feedback. I've had some clinics picked up through those articles, and it's been a really great community to be part of.
Well, the one that I looked at had to do with fear. What are some of the other blogs that you've had in there that you've gotten a lot of feedback on?
Oh, I wrote one on desensitization and how bomb-proofing a horse was not a sure guide to making it safer and how often that can make it more dangerous. That was one of the more read articles that I've written.
Okay, that's an interesting... There's no such thing as a bomb-proof horse, is there?
I don't believe so. No, I believe there's a horse that is shut down. A bomb-proof horse is often just sort of mentally checked out, and in my opinion, that horse is not safer.
When a horse is shut down, I would think they were more dangerous because all of a sudden something can cause them to explode, I would think.
Absolutely. A horse that is subjected to stimulus over and over and learns there's no escape. In other words, we throw the tarp at it, we throw the ball at it, we throw the flag at it, all these things, and people get so proud that the horse is not responding, and the horse is sort of, the light of their eyes is gone. They've learned, I can't get away from this, fight or flight doesn't work, so I need to go somewhere else mentally to deal with this, and they become checked out mentally. But that horse is still living and breathing and still has self-protection drive. And then eventually something is going to pop up to cause that horse to wake up, and it's going to absolutely explode because it has been sort of checked out for so long. I run into it all the time when people bring me a horse that's been bomb-proof, and they say he's the safest horse in the whole world, but out of nowhere he just exploded, and I have no idea why. And it could be anything to trigger that moment of self-preservation in a horse.
When you're out trail riding, you don't want a horse that's asleep or just completely desensitized, I wouldn't think.
No, absolutely not. And, a lot of these types of bomb-proof horses are seen in folks that trail ride, and it's something that sort of baffles me because a horse needs to navigate terrain. It needs to pick up its feet. It needs to go over poles. It needs to go over sticks. It needs to go through weather. It needs to go around wildlife. I would think that a working, thinking brain would be something you would very much want in a trail horse.
North Carolina horsewoman Amy Skinner, good to have her with us on the program today. Stay tuned, folks, because Brian Hale will be doing the second half of the program with some interesting information about rodeo.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Hale. If you've heard this program before, you know I have been offering website help for many years. In fact, we've been in the business for over 20, and we'd love to help you for anything website related, even if you just need some advice. It's free. Email support@halemultimedia.com or call 940-224-6315. Portfolio, pricing, and contacts all on halemultimedia.com.